the process of sitting down with another individual who uh, is one of my best friends in the world now, but at the time it was a stranger, my sponsor, tell him everything that I was resentful at and fearful of in my life to a stranger. No way. That's against everything in my being that says this is normal.
Stories are powerful.
Welcome to the Rise, Recover, Live podcast, brought to you by The Phoenix. This is a space where people impacted by substance use can come to share their story of strength and resilience, get open and honest, and inspire hope and build community through shared experience.
We'll be talking to people in our community on their own recovery journey and shine a light on the topic of recovery in all its forms. Maybe you'll hear some of your story in theirs.
Let's show the world that together we rise, recover, and live.
Welcome to Rise, Recover, Live, the podcast. I am your host, Bryce III, here with my wonderful co-host, Liz. What's up?
Hi, Bryce. Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us again or joining us maybe for the first time. We're so pumped to have you here. We are here to uplift stories about recovery and all the definitions of that. We're powered by The Phoenix, and we have a really incredible guest today who is a coworker, but also a friend and somebody who's told the story a lot of times, like a lot of us have. So I'm really excited to hear how it unfolds today. So Gavin, how the heck are you?
I'm great. That was one hell of an introduction. I'm not going to lie. I was kind of thinking I needed to have some coffee before coming on here a little bit, but Bryce, between the intro and Liz with handing the mic over to me, I'm a little jumpy, a little nervous, but I'm pretty excited too.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. That's very on brand.
Yeah. And I've learned to reframe nervousness and anxiety, because like your body does the same thing when you're nervous and anxious as it does when you're excited. And like, which one holds the best connotation for like my contribution, and which one would I rather? And I usually would rather the excitement. So it's like, what is this? Oh, it's excitement. And then when I lean into that, it allows for me to show up exactly how it is that I'm supposed to show up. And I'm definitely excited to have you here, Gavin. I know we've had a couple of conversations just on the side. We've been working together for about a little over a year. At least that's how long I've been with the Phoenix. And, just the conversations that we've had have let me into your mind. You're a new father, a new father again, right?
Times two.
And so there's a lot of things that we relate on. And I'm just super excited to have you here on the show today to talk about your story, and we'll get all into it. But first and foremost, how's your energy?
So, I mean, you hit the nail on the head. Since I'm a new father for the second time around, I'm functioning on very little sleep. And it's kind of funny, like when it happens, I don't know if y'all have the same experience, but sometimes I have trouble connecting the words accurately to express how I'm feeling. But it also, like, being around new life kind of refocuses on what's very important. So I think the one upside, other than being deliriously tired a lot, is that nothing really seems like a very big deal at all. So it's kind of like a very nice way to go about it. So I'm kind of loopy, might fumble over my words a little bit, but I'm pretty excited and I'm pretty awe-inspired by the life around me right now.
Yeah, no, that's beautiful. That new life too. I don't think I've been to too many places where that conversation is taking place, especially like somebody because I tend to see the world through others' eyes at times, right? So when I'm around babies, I'm always imagining how do you see the world? I've got all this layer of experience on top of me, that let me know oh, when I see a tree, that's a tree. How the mind kind of gets rid of the things that it already knows, where a baby doesn't know anything. And it's I think maybe that there's a pureness in that state that allows for me to tap into to see like you said, what's important, what's really important versus all of this context that I've come to, and all the stuff that I've come to know. I think it's a beautiful thing.
Yeah, it's kind of funny right now. My daughter's a little bit fussy and she doesn't let us put her down too much. But one of the things that I found super soothing for her is if she's crying, upset, whatever, if I go stand by a window, she looks at the sky and she is just locked in. She has no idea what this blue thing is that she's looking at right now. And there's a certain amount of beauty in the simplicity of it, and the fact that maybe if most people spent more time just kind of taking in that aspect of nature, and not worrying about little things that pop up here and there. It is kind of funny that is the most soothing thing in her life today. So
Makes total
it's a nice
sense.
little, yeah.
I mean, that's the
absolutely
most
wonderful.
soothing thing for me too. We forget, like, you're like, we're always looking for that. Like, we're scrolling and, you know, watching the TV and all the things that we feel like we have to like go reach for, and really just like go outside and look up. It's literally always there. Bryce said something to me once that I actually use this when I teach yoga sometimes, Bryce. When we were in Vegas doing a conference and we could see the mountains, we were driving around and everywhere you look, you could see mountains. And I didn't even know Bryce that well then. And I remember he said, I love this stuff. It just makes me feel small in the best way possible. And I was like, oh, that's like the words to the thing that I've always felt and never really knew how to put it into words. So, which Bryce does a lot.
No, yeah, that's absolutely wonderful. And like to speak on like the technology of the human mind, right? So when you first get into a car, you're learning to drive for the first time, and you get into a car, like my son is 16, so like I've recently understood what this means. But he gets in the car and it's like you has to check the mirrors, had to get the seat right, had to make sure the volume's turned down, had to make sure your seatbelt's on, and all these things, right? Because you're first starting, so your mind is first grasping this concept of driving. And then now, like to where I'm at, I get in the car and then I'm to my destination before I even blink my eye, because it's like my mind is so used to it, because there's so many things for the mind to pay attention to, that when there's things that the mind can subtract, it automatically does that. So once we see a tree, and now we know that a tree is a tree, like we subtract the process of seeing a tree for the first time. So like mindfulness allows for us to like really pay it. Like, I know I've seen this tree a million times, but today is the first time ever today that I'm seeing this tree. Can I touch it and see what it feels like? How does it look different today? How is it grown? How is it developed? What is my relationship to this tree in this moment? And I think, you know, with all the context and experience on our bodies and on our minds, the more that we live and have experience, like it can be a little tougher than maybe like a 12-week-old to see this tree for like the wondrous thing that it is. So yeah, that's a beautiful thing to have a baby around. Let's all keep babies around us. Maybe that's the cheat code.
Yeah.
So Gavin, you are a person in recovery, correct?
Yeah, I always have to double check the time, but I think I've been in recovery for like 13 or 14 years at this point. Nice. I got sober in 2008, whatever the math is on that.
Nice.
Awesome.
That's wonderful. So how do you define your personal recovery?
So I guess it's kind of funny, like we were talking a little bit before the recording got started, how like over the time that I've been in recovery, it's like there's different seasons of it. And I would say like the black and white definition of it when I first came around is just that like I don't drink and I don't do drugs anymore. And I thought that was kind of it a little bit. And I also kind of made the mistake, or I guess everybody kind of makes the mistake when they're first putting down substances, is they assume that like instantly by removing that blocker that things are materially going to end up changing. And they would do. I think it's probably important to call out that, you know, the surface of removing those substances from my life and my lifestyle did drastically improve my health outcomes. But I think of them more kind of like blockers or symptoms of something a little bit more underlying that I didn't really get a chance to explore until I was 4 years into my recovery, 5 years into my recovery. Because like the community I got sober in, you know, there was a heavy stigma around being a sober individual, especially being a sober young individual. I got sober at 25. And kind of the not direct or underlying message that I got was kind of that this is something I don't necessarily advertise, or something that I don't necessarily talk about, or this is something I kind of keep to myself. So I wasn't very open about being sober, and I still kind of ran with the same crowd that I used to, even if I was like sitting there having like 30 ginger ales or something like that. And I think not feeling comfortable being uniquely open and discreet about who I am meant that I wasn't really willing to look at a lot of the reasons why I drank for so long, or what was really making me so uncomfortable as a person that I am.
Like, what were you trying to solve by using those substances? Like, what was it trying to make you feel better about? Those are the things that you didn't really look at till later.
I think, like I've heard people talk about substance use being sometimes a hereditary thing, sometimes an environmental thing, sometimes it's the result of trauma. Sometimes it just has to do with access. I grew up in a pretty heavy drinking culture. There's substance use within my family. And I had a couple of things happen to me while I was in high school that were pretty traumatic, and I didn't really have a good way of processing the emotions of it. I was only 16 at the time, and I didn't really have like a good outlet or a sounding board for well, I was involved in a car accident. I was involved in a car accident when I was about 16 years old. I was the driver. I had 3 friends in the car, and I nearly killed all 4 of us just through reckless driving. And two of the individuals actually almost lost their legs as a result of it. And the fallout from it was like there was some financial fallout from it. But also at the same time this was going on, a lot of things weren't really great in my home life. And my parents were kind of growing apart. And the two events weren't really, like, they kind of happened right within the same time frame in my life. So I kind of thought that my parents' marriage deteriorating resulted from this car accident that I caused. And I thought that I was kind of the main reason that my family was now splitting up. And I didn't have any good way of verbalizing this. And when you think everything's your fault and everything's kind of crumbling down around you, I went through this period where I just kind of shut down, and I stopped talking for 9 months, 12 months. I just, not like I refused to talk. It was just like I couldn't really access the necessary emotions in terms of like how to express myself. And I found that the only way that I could access emotions, or the only way that I could open up, is drinking or getting high. And that was like my way to function. So it wasn't necessarily starting off as something that was like happy go lucky and fun. It was more so that I could just kind of like be normal or feel a certain way. But it got to the point where I started to rely on this almost kind of like, not medically, but just in a way to get myself right every single day. Like I felt normal on something. And when I wasn't, I went back into this kind of shell feeling. And then, I got arrested a couple times. I was at school and I got sent to a drug and alcohol counselor. They suggested that I possibly had an issue with alcohol, but I was 20 at the time. And I told them, I'm too young for this. And I wasn't ready to hear it. But sure enough, I started having all these kind of like health problems on the side. Like I had tremors in my hands and my legs. I couldn't sit still. Couldn't sleep during the night, and like during the daytime, I would nod off all the time. I couldn't keep down food. I was probably, I weigh about like 195, 200 pounds right now. But when I was at the bottom, I was about 160 pounds. So I was only like, I was kind of like just a skeleton walking around. Pretty malnourished. Had some other like digestive problems I'm not really going to get into, but yeah, it was pretty heinous. And at the same time, I think most of us in recovery, the worst part about it is that you think you're doing this alone. Like this is only happening to you. Nobody else is ever going to feel this way. No one's ever going to identify with it. And I got really lucky. Just through like a series of circumstances, I ended up finding myself in a 12-step meeting when I was 25. And I was hell-bent on not being in a 12-step meeting and not pursuing recovery because I didn't want this lifestyle. But I heard people telling stories, and the stories weren't the same as mine, but the reasons that they were there, the way they felt, that I identified with. And I walked out of my first meeting and I was hell-bent on going straight to the bar and drinking because I did not want this at all, but I was too scared of what was going to end up happening because I got used to like waking up outside, waking up on park benches, waking up on the side of the highway, waking up behind the steering wheel of my car. And was pretty like pretty certain I wasn't going to live to 30.
What do you consider your recovery to be? And as you continue to delve into the answer to that question, I see that took you to the origins of some of the things that maybe using drugs and alcohol were to avoid or to cope with. And I find that very interesting because, you know, when we think recovery, at least how I've come to understand recovery, it is the tools that I continuously find to be able to apply to my life to show up on life's terms versus, you know, it has to be like this and these things have to look like this, but like, no, whatever life presents to me. And there's still ways, I'm coming up on 9 years myself, and there's still ways where I'm learning different, like we talked a little bit before the show, where it's like some things I'm experiencing because life is unlike it's ever been. So this is a season of my recovery that I have to learn how to pay attention to the tools that may be required to show up for life on life's terms. So yeah, it's very interesting that when I asked you how do you describe your recovery, you started going into like the beginning where like maybe some of your first traumatic experiences or like some of the I always get caught up on this word catalysmic. Is it catalysmic?
That sounds right.
Cataclysmic. Yeah, I missed like a C and a T, but those cataclysmic moments that let us know that, okay, in hindsight, like, oh, that was a big deal. Yeah. That was a big deal. So, I mean, you can carry on if you want to continue kind of like bringing us into your life and how you were led to seek recovery. We got the popcorn. We all in.
Well, I have a question though. Can I ask you a question, Gavin?
Dude.
Do you remember I have a very different story than you just because all of our stories are really unique, but I still deeply remember like in my bones, the feeling the first time I drank and like feeling like not like, oh, this is to party, but like now I'm gonna be okay, like here we go, like I found the answer, like. And I feel like I've heard a lot of people who've experienced addiction to alcohol say something similar where it was like that they remember that moment where it was just like, oh, this is it, this is what I've been looking for. So I'm just always curious if somebody else had that experience too.
Yeah, I guess for me, like all the adults that I'd always been around drank in social gatherings, and it wasn't abnormal for kids to get into it. So like, I don't really know my first drink, but it was probably like before I was 11.
Wow.
And I don't think anybody who saw me doing it probably threw up their hands and said, no way, you can't do this or something like that. Maybe it was something that they laughed at. And I thought, oh, okay, this is how all the adults in my family connect. Like now I feel like I'm a part of something. So there is a lot of like family connection to this as well for me. But I do know the feeling that you're talking about carrying around a lot of dis-ease and then all of a sudden having that being taken away and feeling like, all right, like now I'm kind of like right in the center of my world. Like this feels like home. This is that warm, numb feeling that I'm looking for.
Totally. Yeah. And then it's baffling when suddenly that turns on you and it doesn't work anymore, which sounds like it happened pretty young for you.
Yeah. I mean, I think, you know, we're all young people on this podcast right here, I think, and we all got into this. You know, I think now the stigma around recovery is so that like anybody can access it, whereas maybe 20, 30 years ago, you needed to have a track record of like 30 years of baggage before anybody would have considered this. And I think now more so people are finding this lifestyle and way of living unencumbered, which has been so positive for a lot of our colleagues and a lot of the people that we end up working with in our programs. But it did, like the seasons of recovery, like you said, Bryce, it did shift over time. I think once I put down drinking and drugs, I threw myself into work because I felt this need to prove myself constantly because I still had very low self-worth, and I became married to my work and married to my job. And it wasn't until I was maybe like around 30 years old, I was 5 years into recovery, I started suffering panic attacks. And mental health's a big part of my story because I think there's another big heavy stigma around the idea of panic attacks or seeking out help, things like that. I'll be the first to raise my hand and say, like, when I first heard of panic attacks, I was like, that sounds made up. Or that's someone that had too much coffee, or like, just get over it. Just grit your teeth, you know? when I hear people talk about struggling with panic attacks, I'm like, that's not real. That's a figment of your imagination. And then I remember where I was with my brother. We were on a trip together, and I was on a bus, and then all of a sudden I got this tight feeling in my chest. I couldn't breathe. I had this feeling like I was going to throw up, and my peripheral vision just kind of sunk in, so I could only see like a few inches in front of my face. And I ended up having to stick my head out the window because I thought I couldn't get any air. And I thought I just got car sick. But then when we took the bus back that afternoon, the same thing happened. And then the next day, the same thing happened. And then it got to the point where anytime I was on public transportation, anytime I was in a closed room where the door was shut and the windows were shut, anytime my day started at work, I would have these panic attacks over and over again. And I didn't have substances to rely on anymore. So, and I didn't want to talk about this with anyone because I didn't want people to think I was having any problems, because I'm 5 years sober. I have this all figured out. Like, I should be good now. Yeah, I started turning over every stone possible. And this gets to the point about like what recovery looks like now. My life in 12-step is an integral part of my recovery at that point, but it's only a piece of what I needed to do to get help. So I started seeing a psychologist. I tried to look at, is there possible medicine that I could utilize for this sort of thing? Are there other things I should be doing outside of my work life? And it turned out that I had a really unhealthy balance with what I was doing professionally. And I used that as a way of defining myself. And once I realized that, one, I was trying to cover up for all these deficiencies that I've been carrying around ever since I was a teenager. And two, my work wasn't that important. My life was more important. So I started seeking out things that enriched my life, spending less time on social media, turning off my phone at night, not watching as much TV, getting outside more, exercising, spending more time in conversation with healthy people, both people I knew in recovery, but also people that were doing healthy things for themselves. And it's actually kind of funny. I was living in Chicago at the time. And it was around the time I ended up hearing about Phoenix, which at that time we didn't have a chapter in Chicago. I think things were still kind of very heavy in Colorado, but I always had it in the back of my mind. Wow, like what a cool opportunity and a cool organization to try and work for, to kind of spread this message out. So I guess that's a way of saying that, like, these days there's a lot of things that go into feeling right and making my recovery a lot of different practices that don't seem like work anymore. They more have become like a little bit of my personality and my lifestyle. But at first it was a lot of like being willing to try anything to see like what works for me.
I think it's a James Clear thing from Atomic Habits, which is a really cool book if anybody is looking for a cool book to read. And he talks a lot about that, about how it's when habits become part of your identity that they really stick. It's not about like, the willpower and not even always about having positive reinforcement, but it's really just like when you if you want to start running, if you start identifying as a runner, you are one, and then you'll run, as opposed to being like, I have to run this many miles every single day before I've accomplished my goal. And I think recovery is really similar to that. So I am not a 12-step person. I dabbled in meetings here and there when I mean, over many of the times that I was just desperate and would do anything, or was trying to apologize. This is my I'm sorry to my family. I'll go to meetings every single day. But one thing that I always struggled with as a person with low self-worth, low self-esteem, with a lot of anxiety, was within those 12 steps talking about your defects and accepting that you have these defects and asking for these defects to be taken away. So, because I was a person who lived every moment feeling crushed by my defects, like just deeply aware of them. So to just continue to acknowledge them felt hard for me, as opposed to, the yoga mat was a big part of recovery for me. And that was a place where I came to just this deep acceptance of my defects and like love myself, not in spite of things that I'd considered flaws, but like for those, and having this just kind of like full integration. And So just hearing what you're saying that I relate to so deeply, but I know 12-step is really meaningful to you. Is there a way that speaks to you in a way that's different than the way maybe somebody like me or folks who aren't in that 12-step program might have heard it?
I think, so for me, like before I got the 12-step, I didn't know that there was anything that was my fault. Like I was like ultimately like it's the fact that I came up this way, and the fact that this thing happened to me, and the fact that this person did this thing to me, and the fact that I was born here, and the fact that I don't got no money, and the fact that I came from this. And I mean, all those things are just like all those things are justifiable.
Valid.
Like I can point to these things and justifiably say like this is the reason why like these things are what they are, but like my quality of life was not the best because I was doing that. So like when I came to 12-step and we got to that that fourth and fifth step where it's like we're looking at, and the way I was walked through the process was like, look, okay, now give me a person, like give me all the people that's ever did anything wrong to you. I'm like, okay, cool. Okay, back with a list of like 150
got it in my
people.
back pocket.
Like,
it's laminated.
That's easy. That's easy. And then it was like, now list off everything that they did to you. I'm like, even easier. The pen is on fire. The paper is burning. Like I'm going crazy, and I'm my face is screwed up as I'm writing the things that they did. And then, how did it affect you? Well, it affected me like this. And, I'll tell you when he did this, when she did that, man, I'll tell you, I felt like this. And then it was like, okay, so what was the role that you played? I was like, what? Like, what are you talking about? The role that I played? Like, I don't play a role. Like like life happens to me. It was a paradigm shift for me because it allowed for me to see like, oh, how am I playing a role in this? Because when I was coming up, I used to get beat up by, my sister daddy in the house. I used to get, tortured and, punched in my nose on Thanksgiving Day. I'm like 12 and all type of stuff like that. Yes, that was, something I had no control over, and I can point my finger and blame. But then there were things that I would do that like, oh, the reason I'm doing this because I ain't never had no dad, because like I ain't never had no role model, but now I'm perpetuating this thing. So it's like, oh, like, well, the role I played is by continuing to show up and doing things on to other people and using that as the reason as to why I'm doing these things. So it gave me like the viewpoint that allowed, it really revealed to me a whole new dimension of like responsibility that maybe I never had. Also, it gave me context. It gave me context to work with, because like I couldn't initially improve my life if I didn't have like what to practice the opposite of. So once it brought to like light, like, oh, these are the defects, and somebody told me something very early on in 12-step, like, look, if you don't know how to improve, like just practice the opposite of the defects that you found. So it's like, okay, these are the ways that I've been a negative contribution. These are the ways that I've been selfish, self-seeking, and dishonest. So practice the opposite. So, and like slowly but surely, it felt counterintuitive at first, but like where I would lie, because like lying just became second nature for me, because I had to hide how I was that I was feeling and what it was that I was going through. And I would have so many rooms that I would go into and have a mask on in all these rooms. And each room I had to like put a different mask on and pretend to be what it is that I thought that they wanted, because I didn't want to not be accepted. Like I had to like learn to tell the truth. And it's like, I would feel the inclination, because it became second nature for me to lie. I feel the inclination to lie, but instead of lying, I would tell the truth. And it was like, ugh, what is this? But like being like having this revealing self understanding process of figuring out like what my contribution was, that allowed for me to have the context to improve. And now some of those things like telling the truth, or giving and sharing and showing up for people and being on time, and like all those things that were counterintuitive, now they're like intuitive, because they become part of my habits. And like you said, like the James Clear quote, where it's like, now I'm an honest person, and I see myself as being so. But inherently, I thought that I was dishonest, but I didn't even know that I thought that, because it's like the fish in the water. You ask the fish, how's the water? The fish like, what water, right? So like that process was like being pointed out that, oh, I'm in water, and picking me up out of the water for a second to see there's a whole other way of living. And then I had that context. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I love that. I think the fourth and the fifth step, specifically when I think of the resentment side of things and the fear side of things, the 12-step process is great for bringing people up to that point. But I think even outside of 12-step, it's a worthwhile conversation for people to have with others in their circle, just to say like, hey, you know, I had the same experience as Bryce, but mine came on the fear list. Like in terms of my life, when I listed out my fears, I was afraid of everything. And a lot of it just came down to things that I wanted in my life that I didn't have, or things that I had that I didn't want people to know that bothered me. Because, you talk about masks. I think it's really easy for us to go through life and pretend like things don't bother us, or people don't bother us, or that we're okay. And the process of sitting down with another individual who he's one of my best friends in the world now, but at the time it was a stranger, my sponsor, tell him everything that I was resentful at and fearful of in my life to a stranger. No way. That's against everything in my being that says this is normal. But a lot of the things that drive resentments for us every single day are fears. And the one I always throw around a lot is imposter syndrome. And, like I don't belong in this space. And why do I think I don't belong? Do I measure success in terms of other person's accumulation of materials throughout their life? Do I measure myself against other men? Is that measuring stick healthy or unhealthy? Chances are it's usually unhealthy. Do I measure myself against my own personal growth? That's probably a better place to start, but nobody wants to talk about that. Everybody wants to pretend like everything is okay. And putting myself in what felt like a very vulnerable position, all of these things that were bothering me that felt like mountains in my life kind of got the air taken out of them a little bit, because they didn't seem like that big of a deal once I voiced them to somebody else, especially when that person said, oh yeah, that reminds me exactly how I felt at this point in my life. And they share a similar story back. So it's a lot of like problem right sizing that happens through that process. But I think that's a worthwhile process for people to go after, whether they find themselves in the rooms of 12-step or whether they go another route within their recovery. Just being able to authentically talk about these things in their life with somebody else. Therapists work great for that too. But I know that's like a different dynamic, because like there is an exchange of goods and services there, but at the same time, they're wonderful at what they do.
Yeah.
That's super helpful. Thank you. I appreciate that. I don't, like I said, 12-step is something that's not foreign to me, but I never did the steps. So I could never say that I truly understand it. But the cool thing about what you both said, I mean, the fact that you're both coming at it from such different places, like just in general from different places, but the fear piece versus the, pointing the finger outward versus inward piece. And they both do end up in the same place of just like this acceptance and having these mountains, like you said, just not be quite as giant. It's just removing barriers from your best self. And I mean, not to say my experience was the same at all, but like I think that is actually what happened with me on the yoga mat. It wasn't the same process, but it was a lot of the same outcome of just being able to see myself more clearly. And
what was some of that process for you, Liz? I'm curious.
A lot of it was intention setting. I don't know how much yoga that you two do. I know Bryce does a lot of mindfulness. Do you do yoga, Gavin?
I actually have been doing yoga longer than I've been doing CrossFit.
No way. Oh my God, that makes me really happy. So, the beginning of most classes, if you don't already have it in your mind, the instructor is going to say, what's your intention, or talk about setting intentions. And that used to feel to me like making a wish. I remember for a long time, I would like set an intention of like abundance, because I was like, I'm making a wish for more money, because money was like the thing I was very afraid of. Like it was just never enough. And, shockingly, that didn't work. I didn't like win the lottery because of my yoga intention to make money. But when I dove more deeply into like what that actually meant, and had some yoga teachers that I was lucky enough to have a really personal relationship and talk about like, what does this mean? Like, what is intention setting? And do some exercises with, journaling and gratitude lists and things like that. I was able to come to a place where the intentions were really personal. And suddenly I found that they weren't about the things that I wanted, more about like who I wanted to be. And sometimes that was about being overcoming things that I felt like I wanted, like being better in a way that I was aware of. And other times I would find that just when the more deeply I got into a practice where I was really in touch with myself, the more things would come up that I didn't realize that integrity was something that I needed to work on. But that was just the word that kept coming up in yoga practice. And I would practice on the mat, being really honest with myself in every physical posture, and then take that into the day and be really honest throughout the day, and suddenly realize how many places I wasn't being honest. And like, just, it sounds a lot more magical, like woo, than it was, because it really was a intentional practice, but it felt magic too. And it still does. Like that still happens for me. So
yeah, that magic is important. So I think like as a coach, like it's important for me to let people know that the work that we do has physical manifestation. Like we work in the physical plane, the physical reality. Let's see change. Let's see quantifiable change. But a part of that change for real is that internal magic of that experience that adds meaning to whatever it is that we're bringing to fruition. I rarely have space to, not that I don't have space to talk about, I just don't think that I've explored it out loud, really like in front of closed doors. Like I had an initial spiritual experience like in rehab that it was like, it hit me like that. It was like a special set of circumstances. I still can't explain it. I don't know how it happened. And that was like the beginning that kind of like broke me open. It's like, okay, this is something new that I've never experienced. And it was magic. I mean, but you say magic, you scare people. So we try to stay away from magic and try, and try
exactly.
To like
that's why I'm just
plane.
Like, it's real, I swear. But I actually really love the word magic and the idea of magic.
So Gavin, you mentioned that there are a lot of tools and practices that you've cultivated over the years in your recovery that at first were maybe counterintuitive because it was like learning, but now they're like a part of your living. So what are some of those tools, and what ones have helped you the most?
Well, I think regular exercise, however people define that, I think, and it's just essentially like whatever you do to move your body, get fresh air, put yourself in possibly in not really uncomfortable situation, but anything where you can kind of get up and move around a little bit, even if it's walking your dog. That's a really simple thing that I think people can put into their life. Putting a limit on the amount of time I spend with social media and the amount of time I spend with technology, because I found that, as social media kind of ramped up a little bit, a lot of those things that showed up on my fourth and fifth step, it became a great platform to either hide behind or scratch those fears and resentments a little bit. And having a limit around that, improving the quality of my sleep, which meant improving the relationship that I have with technology, like not sleeping with my phone, turning my phone off and leaving it in a completely different part of the house, what I eat, but also kind of what's important to me in terms of how I measure myself against myself. And anything that's a healthy practice in my life, I've also found ways to make it unhealthy. And I'll talk about yoga because we were just talking about yoga. But when I was a year sober, one of the older women in the place I was going to meetings, she recommended that I start taking Bikram classes because I had a lot of issues with anger, and she said it would help kind of like mellow me out a little bit. And I got into Bikram, and if anybody's not familiar, I think it's 26 postures that you end up going through 2 times. And I was competitive. Like I would go in there and I'd look at other people and I'd try and beat them at yoga, which is exactly not the reason that you want to be going to yoga. And I remember I'd be on this mat next to this like 60-year-old woman, and she'd be getting in and out of these postures, and I'd be on my back, like couldn't keep my breath. And it was really humbling to dive more into yoga as a practice in terms of a personal journey, because you spend more time focusing on like, all right, this is something I've been working on as a goal, and whether or not I get there has nothing to do with what the rest of the class is doing. And if you start to look at your life in terms of making incremental progress and being focused on that, and less so about what people have done with their external life and a comparison. I'm a big quote person, and one of my favorite ones that I hear this day and age is, comparison's the thief of joy. So I try to stay out of looking at other people and what they're doing and whatever their journey is. So I guess it's more of kind of like a mindset thing necessarily than like a check these 3 boxes and you'll be good to go type of thing. But if I keep looking outside myself for solutions, I'm never happy. So I have to do a little bit of keeping everything internally on an even keel. And I don't go to 12-step much anymore. I think I've probably been to like maybe 8 12-step meetings since the pandemic started, mostly because I'm kind of like Zoom averse. But the 2 men who I met at one of my very first meetings in AA are still 2 of my best friends today. And now instead of going to meetings together, we walk our dogs together. So I still keep constructive individuals in my life and people that I can talk about how I'm feeling, not because I'm looking for advice or I'm looking for them to solve my problem. I'm mostly just looking for people that are willing to listen. And I think it's a nice way of being in service too. Like if I have a friend that's going through something, it's really presumptive on my part to say like, oh, I know what's going to fix your problem. I know like this is going to help you. It's more like, hey, you just need to talk and you need someone to listen and hear. Let me do that for you. I'm not going to be able to give you any advice to solve the problem, but at least I'll be someplace where you can kind of bring it. And I kind of rely on those individuals. And I think they've also come to rely on me a little bit. And that's been really helpful.
And that's beautiful. That's beautiful. Community has been every step of the way the number one thing, whether it be the meditation community, whether it be the community at the Phoenix, whether it be my 12-step community, whether it be the artist community, whether it be the Buddhist community, whether like every step of the way when it got too tough and I felt like I couldn't push forward or I didn't have the answers, there was a community that I was able to tap into with other people that had the information. And if they didn't have the information, they had the support. If they didn't have the support, they had the experience that I could feed off of. And they had the strength and hope that I could pull out of. So yes, community, I 100% agree, Gavin. That's a big thing. And like you said, like anything I use externally to make me feel better is a losing game once I start to depend on things external. But I can use things like community, like yoga, like meditation, like the physical activity. I can use those things to go deeper within, and then that goes back to Liz's point, having that intention. Like, what am I doing this for? Am I doing this for the first place yoga trophy, or am I doing this to discover what context I fit into the world in contrast to other individuals, and like how to use that to further deepen my practice and my understanding of my own life. And so it's a beautiful thing. I love hearing people's stories and hear people's tools and how to use tools, because I might meditate, you might meditate, but we might not meditate the same. 9 times out of 10, we probably don't. We probably have a different journey. So such a beautiful thing to bear witness to your tools and how you use them.
I'm so in love with the fact that we started this podcast. Sorry, I'm about to clap and then I remember there's a microphone. We started this podcast talking about babies and like that, looking at the world through new eyes, and just like that, looking up at the sky and those simple things are just where your baby is the most soothed. And like, I live my life in metaphors, and that's just, which is not even a metaphor, because it's just like we all have that baby still in us, and especially in recovery, early recovery, all of recovery, every morning I wake up, there's still so many things with fresh eyes, and just looking up at the sky and being outside, and the simple things that connect you with yourself inside are always the things that will soothe you, whether you're a screaming, baby, or a, screaming 41-year-old, either way. So that's cool.
I'm literally a screaming baby, like 16 hours out of a day.
Yeah.
Same here.
It's awesome.
Yes. Well, Gavin, it's been an absolute pleasure to have you on the podcast. I think this conversation is an invaluable evergreen conversation, and I'm pretty sure people can listen to this episode 2 years from now, and it will speak to them. I think somebody can listen to this episode today and then listen to it 2 weeks from now, and if they have had experience in growing, maybe pull something different out of this for a second listen. So I'm glad you stopped by. I know it was super last minute for you to come on, and but such is synchronicity, such is the way that the universe works. Let's not get too magical, Liz. And I'm gonna shoot it over to Liz because Liz has the special final question that changes every episode, and I'm so interested in today's iteration of this question.
And you always build it up, and then I can feel myself getting red. It's not even that unique a question, but I just can't ever remember how to say it. So Gavin, this big question. So there's a lot of versions of ourselves, right? There's our very youngest self. I mean, you had seasons, we've all had seasons in our lives and our recovery and everything, but without putting a lot of thought into it, if that's even possible, if you could look back or have a conversation with one version of yourself, a previous version, what message would you send to that person? What would you say? It doesn't have to be advice. It doesn't even have to be wildly inspirational. Maybe just your keys are in the freezer. But what might you say to a previous version of you as who you are today?
So I guess it would go to whatever version of me in the past it could land on. But I think
you get to pick.
Even if it was prior to coming into recovery, I'll say like sometime in my teens or 20s, anytime somebody's sitting with a certain amount of dis-ease within their life, I think there's this misunderstanding where they have to like make wholesale change overnight. And when wholesale change overnight doesn't happen, they get immediately frustrated and say like, well, this path is not for me because I wasn't successful in the span of 3 days. But if I look at a lot of the stuff that's going on in my life right now, all the best things happen because of small incremental changes over a long period of time. So if you have some, like the best version of myself, which I think is the version that's here talking to you today, happened because of like a lot of small things over the past 13 years, 15 years, whatever. And if people are looking to make the same kind of changes in their life, don't be afraid at doing something small today in the hopes that that ends up becoming a part of who you are 10 years down the road. And don't get discouraged if it doesn't immediately occur overnight. I think maybe a little bit more patience, and considering the fact I thought I was going to be dead at 30, maybe that's why I wasn't so patient, but a couple more months and I'll be 40. And I think I'm in the best shape of my life. And I feel the best I've ever felt. And a lot of it is just because of like small things, and the small things really add up over time.
So thank you, all the other versions of Gavin, for doing all the small things that brought us this version today.
Well, thank you. And this version of Bryce really needed that, man. I appreciate that for you.
Yeah, of course. I think, you all thanked me for coming on, but I think kind of blazing this new trail with what the Phoenix is doing and giving a microphone to other people to talk about their life and their experience and being able to elevate their voice. I think both of you should really be championed for stepping out and trying something new. So thanks for letting me play a small part today.
You know what, Liz? We never told like anybody what Gavin does with the Phoenix.
I know. I actually was going to say we might have to have Gavin on again because I feel like we got real deep real fast, which is our favorite, but we just scratched the surface of who Gavin is. But yeah, Gavin, if you want to just shout out what you do at the Phoenix, that would be pretty cool for folks to hear.
Yeah, certainly. So I work with a lovely group of people that head up our national partnerships team here at the Phoenix. But my journey with the organization started as a CrossFit coach volunteering his time at a local gym in South Philly on Saturdays. And then slowly over time, I got the opportunity to come and work here full time. And it's been a wild ride to be able to marry what you love with a profession. And I get to work with you all. So pretty lucky guy right here.
We're lucky too. Really grateful to know you and to work with you and to be able to have this conversation with you today.
I mean, if people don't have us already on their socials, that say following the Phoenix on Instagram and Facebook, and now it sounds like Spotify as well too is really important, or wherever you get your podcasts. And if you want to follow me on Instagram, it's Gavin from Philly. But these days it's less exciting. It's mostly photos of dogs and babies. But, there's still a place for that in the world. So if you like that stuff, that's where I'm at.
What could be more exciting than that? I think
there's got to be like a domain name out there that's taken called dogsandbabies.com. I'm pretty sure that's in high demand.
Totally.
Go Google that right now.
If it's not, look, hey, I got dibs. I'm trying to get this money.
I know. Oh man, there's somebody. Somebody out there buying it right now, and they're going to be like, I'll sell it to you, Bryce, for $1 million. Well, I think...
Speaking of being real, by the way, I don't know if y'all notice this, but this is baby spit up right here on the shoulder.
See?
Oh, cute.
There we go.
That's amazing. There we go. Well, I had a dog climb up on my lap at one point during this talk. That was a first for the Rise, Recover, Live podcast. So everyone meet Griffin. It might not be the last time. All right. Well, thank you for joining us. Thank you so much, Gavin, for being here. It was just always an honor to hear anybody's story. It's such an honor to hear someone's story that you're able to know and work with closely and then get to know them a little bit more. I love being here with you, Bryce. Grateful for every moment. And if you want to get more involved with the Phoenix, please check us out online. We are at thephoenix.org. Even better, please download our app where you can join events both in person and virtually. Check out our on-demand content. Join groups where you can chit-chat with folks just from your living room in your pajamas if you'd like to. And if you want, you can maybe even become a volunteer. So all that information will be in our show notes. Please rate and review. Send this episode to a friend who might need to hear it. And we're grateful for every one of you. We'll see you next time.
So now you're excited. Bryce, Liz, how do I get involved with the Phoenix? Well, my friend, it is super simple. We actually have an app. Head over to the Google Play Store or the Apple App Store, or look in the show notes of this podcast, wherever you're listening to or watching this podcast, and go download the Phoenix app.
The Phoenix app makes it so easy to find classes that are near you or to access our virtual class schedule where you can hop on from the comfort of your home. You can also join our groups and have a conversation with someone from the Phoenix community from anywhere in the world. Please make sure that you join the podcast group where you can connect with Bryce and I and other listeners. Everything that you need is in the show notes. You can also head to our website at www.thephoenix.org. And maybe while you're there, you click the volunteer tab and get even more involved.